always collected my room key when I went out and held it until I returned for a night's sleep at the formerly grand and by then faded National Hotel, a 5-minute walk from Red Square and Lenin's tomb. They said they pocketed my keys so they could clean the room while I was out. As I walked the streets, in between meetings with government officials, it was damp and freezing cold, and yet it was hard to stop watching the mesmerizingly efficient mechanized removal of ever-present snow being cleared from the broad boulevards and then dumped into the Moscow River. I imagined this to be a massive socialist snow-removing operation, far different than the haphazard snow shoveling near the Flint River, in the industrial Midwestern town where I was raised, which is now known more for its contaminated public water supply than its storied past as a major automotive manufacturing hub. As a Rotary International Scholar, I had been invited to the Soviet Union at age 21 to conduct face-to-face meetings with ranking government officials who were 3 times my age and 4 times my girth. In America, I was just a budding philanthropic executive, and it took all my self-confidence to pretend I was talking to my equals and to hold conversations of substance through ever-present interpreters. The images of numerous Moscow meetings in massive communist office blocks and in Leningrad's more traditional historic buildings where our meetings were held have never left me. While the meetings were all planned and orchestrated for me, I was left on my own to conduct them. Communication was challenging, but ultimately informative and rewarding. In the evenings, I found cultural events and museums to visit. More than once, I risked being noticed by the police when I agreed to tutor strangers who begged me to teach them English. I used a few books I had stowed away in my suitcase to train them, which was a violation of my visa conditions. I'm not sure I understood the potential cost of my youthful indiscretions, and I was certain to have warranted the creation of a thin surveillance dossier of some kind. The next time I would negotiate with Soviet officials came a decade later when I was working for President Ronald Reagan. These meetings included their own measure of intrigue. After 3 weeks of meetings in Moscow and Leningrad on this first trip, I boarded a Russian Aeroflot 747 jet bound for New York, complete with farmers holding their highly excited caged chickens, as well as cold cuts and vodka, which they shared liberally with their fellow travelers. Now I faced something more frightening than my meetings with the portly communists I had become acquainted with on my trip, or the tinge of terror I felt flying across the Atlantic on a rickety plane with boisterous Russians. Once I arrived back in the U.S. from the Soviet Union, it was my responsibility to give a speech to the Rotary Club about my experience. The good news was that my dad was a Dale Carnegie speech instructor, and I had been his student. The bad news was that he would be in the audience to judge and possibly inhibit my performance. This would not be the first time I would suffer from his severe critique of my speaking skills. He was the master teacher, and I was less than a master student. I had learned and practiced the basic principles of the then famous Dale Carnegie training, thinking and imagining key points, tricks of memorization, dramatic storytelling, and more. Contemplating the task ahead, I thought about the perils of not presenting well. Making every effort to turn fear into positive energy, I began to realize just how important storytelling and communicating are to history, scientific discoveries, and human progress. I also began to imagine for the first time the power of my own voice and its potential to educate and enlighten the audience about conditions.